Doesn't look like we have any questions right now. One thing I do want to say is that the 1AC is the marijuana ask. Marge is going to put that on the Dropbox for you all. And we'll give some time to kind of get that going.
I believe I already uploaded it to the Dropbox.
Perfect. Okay, some tips before the 1AC gets going, or thoughts that you all should be thinking about. What is the best connection in the 1AC, and what are areas which the 1AC could improve? You could write things in this section about things about delivery, or you could write things about the structure of the 1AC case, maybe some things you thought should be preempted, some things that you think are missing, but you might want to be thinking about those two things during this first 1AC period. We're going to take a break after the 1AC, talk about those things, and then move into cross-ex of the first affirmative constructive. Okay, Margaret, whenever you are ready.
Okay, y'all. You need 2 pieces of paper for this 1AC. And if you're timing along, make sure your timer is set for 9 minutes. Though please make sure you are muted so that your timer does not interrupt the debate. Ready? Okay. Plan. The United States federal government should enact substantial criminal justice, policing, and sentencing reform by removing marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act. Advantage 1 is decentralized federalism. The Controlled Substances Act centralizes power with the federal government. Non-enforcement and congressional protections don't solve. Only CSA removal decentralizes power and allows state experimentation. Adler in 17 sections reiterated the federal authority to enforce drug laws regardless of state law. He resists congressional efforts to protect initiatives to reform marijuana laws. A majority of state yes federal prohibition casts a shadow. Appropriations right only go so far. Marijuana is illegal, has far-reaching implications. The DEA can raid dispensaries, those who produce or sell are subject to civil RICO suits. RICO could be the monster that ate marijuana federalism. The only way to project state-level marijuana reformers to efforts is to change federal law, allowing for different states to adopt different policies, encourages policy experimentation. At the end of federal alcohol prohibition provides a potential model. Removing marijuana from the CSA solves state experimentation, avoids race to the bottom, and produces the best regulatory structure. Schuckman in 12. CSA's the most salient consequences. Not clear that the Fed has the authority to mandate state policies. Federal-Fed regulations and efficient improvements for hindering innovation against the loom of the CSA. The potential for enforcement rules. Experimentation comes competition, innovative regulatory schemes. The Fed involvement does not have adequate state room for state innovation. States are left in defiance of federal policy. The state-based federal supported by citizen choice and innovation. Zero centralization. Also, states experimental regulatory policy repeal. The CSA as it relates to marijuana will lead to benefits of state-based authority. States will compete for industry by adjusting incentive structure. Fed regulation will not solve the prisoner's dilemma. Oversight lead to inefficient regulation. It's not clear that a race to the bottom will occur to marijuana. States stand to benefit from tax revenues. The state autonomy seems to be the best alternative. State legislators are left in the dark. Federalization stifles innovation and experimentation, replacing jurisdictional competition, regulatory oversight, and unwavering rules out of crosswords conflict will law are waiting to see how the game will play out. Trump has put democracy on the brink, but empower states can check him. Tubbs in 17. Democracy and institution under grid works against suppressive national power wars, include Trump's exos and rhetoric and competition and indifference to other facts. Our democracy as well as institution to prevent fascism, but bear in mind the cruel role of federalism is such also to check presidency states and counterbalance their federal overreaching. Any who worries about it, who national tyranny should favor a more robust federalism. First, suppression of power, avoiding concentration of power. Second, states function as laboratories of democracy, a federal system, and maintaining peace and avoiding authoritarian politics. State regulatory experimentation is vital to democratic consolidation. It ensures accountability, civic engagement, and representation. Sarah can 12. The states are not the regulatory summons. They cannot fulfill the role in the federal system. The government cannot deliver the political thought was inherent in the constitutional order. Developed depends on regulatory sovereignty of states. When federal laws are dictated, regulatory details and enable to implement creative policies, or when the states are in control, they can respond efficiently. This fosters public appreciation of respect for local government, encouraging civic participation. The ability to enhance the democracy of states or regulated party can be represented. The enhancement depends on the states' requisite regulatory autonomy to create diverse policy to create states hold the most regulatory power in citizens, creating easily influence by state policy. Enhanced democracy is only possible through a grant of broad regulatory autonomy. Liberal democracy solves existential impacts, but U.S. democratic norm setting is vital. Kasparov in 17. The existential threat is real terror in the Middle East, extremist practices across Europe, North Korea, nuclear blackmail, and aggressive Russia. They want to turn back. They are thriving. They are retreating to freedom, makes such a fight for 10 years. The American leadership begins at home, and American not lead if there's no unity on the importance of America's or engages level, not seen to decades as an opportunity consistently created decades as ability, strong institution, not less politicians, dictators can operate only tacitly. They can only be met by prudent strategy. They based on shared values. They will step back to us, cannot quit democracy. Is the only remedy for every crisis, warfare, and poverty generated, exacerbated by authoritarian regimes. There is no one else. There is no weapon more powerful than America being invaded and admired. State experimentation is critical to shape the Trump presidency. It encourages moderation, sets a more progressive agenda. In 17, many think the best progressives do is to block legislation and challenging in court. But if they have access to the most powerful weapons, federalism is using the states. Progressives can resist state policies and enforce compromise. The promising federalism include the Environment Consumer Protection Rollback and daycares regulations remain on the books. States can keep compliance even when Trump repeals. States can take advantage of powerful weapon. The spillover. They force debate, encouraging compromise. Spillovers force potlucking, negotiation, and moderation. If New York regulates regulates lead, children everywhere will be safer for forming immigration. They can directly advance working through the state institutions. States set the agenda, grapple and debate. Protest cannot. Progressive tools to encourage moderation and reshape conversation. Can use all the. Sorry, I accidentally skipped a line. Solves extinction from climate change, maintains international consensus. Podesta in 17. Trump agenda would make climate change worse, a grave danger to our planet, but we can still avert the most severe impacts of the most damaging policies can be stated, indicated, alternative path, the issue the countries have the Paris or national officials can become leaders in international movements and leeways. We cannot overstate the stakes of the state level climate change has been fight multiplier conflict really exasperated climate change only identified. Climate change is a serious risk versus sea level rise and weather drive at the cost who Trump can ignore. It is untailors to find paths to progress as we fight every day to stop Trump. Some warming is inevitable, but cuts now can avoid catastrophic levels at risk extinction. Sober in 15. If being stopped and emitting temperatures would have risen, but policies will slow the warming is more about avoid its worst impacts would allow species to adapt. It's not a question of whether climate change will rocket or how bad will climate change and inertia best impacts as human activities will be felt in a larger fraction of larger irreversible carbon can be limited. The temperature will reach 1.5 degrees. The limits could untypically but beyond which abrupt planetary scale changes occur. Warming if unchecked will reach 8 degrees. It inevitably doesn't mean that we won't have a choice, but we actively will do this somehow. When global warming in a minute will be stopped at 2 degrees. Advantage 2 is industry. State legalization is enabling in 20. By the end of 2020, every state will have marijuana laws on the books deviates from federal laws. People can still be prosecuted because the federal ban is expected to budget after more confusion of the laws. But companies will go bankrupt without federal legalization. CSA creates a chilling effect that drives market share into an illicit market. Mahonti in 20. Marijuana companies have struggled to get financial support for marijuana, still classified illegal under federal law. Results banks hesitate providing loans for the firms considered action. The federal might take the Treasury said that they can't fix the banking problem. Cannabis companies are heading towards bankruptcy. Prominent players are scaling down on their work for surviving justice and multiple companies need to function. However, U.S. federal law prohibits much. It said that it doesn't have much power. That is said to Congress's responsibility and ongoing problems state to state. Federal lawsuits are creating problems for the IRS. Cannabis companies struggle to get financial support. Who's not money from the illicit market prohibition forces U.S. cannabis companies into bankruptcy. Criminalization crushes domestic industry, prevents economic recovery and funds cartels. Crane in 20. Our nation is in the midst of COVID-19 problem in the economy into the worst economic downturn in the country. Will be looking for new revenue to replenish budget jobs. The situation reminisces of the Great Depression. Common solution for into alcohol prohibition. The states of leisure cannabis health industry employs nearly 250,000 more than 4 times. All those numbers only scratch the surface of an industry that remains illegal. Federally, national legalization could result in $128.8 billion and 1.6 million jobs. Repealing prohibitions are substantial money needed for the critical New Deal projects. Control of the American rising gain from the terror southward of the decades of drug war. 30% Mexican cartel revenue is derived from illicit cannabis, something that could largely disappear without legalization. The continued criminalization of marijuana is sending much economic evidence north of the border. Canadian cannabis companies have enjoyed outsized growth in the cannabis market. Canadian public cannabis companies enjoy upwards of 10 times as high as their American counterparts. These companies are already using their caps to position themselves to enter the U.S. Economic collapse caused extinction. Man, and 14 economic consideration could figure probably the true future complex economic uncertainty will present new challenges for national security and states who may subject to happiness for balancing to stronger states likely to mature into global security threats. Rival states may also become involved to challenge America's loose WMD can oppose with threat to security. Financial factors can influence WMD proliferation. Vulnerabilities within the market will provide terrorist opportunities. Weaken American states. Narco-terrorism causes state failure, results in millions of deaths. Defeating them with force is impossible. Diaz Cayeros in 19. A war is raging in Mexico with Mexico to risk becoming a failed state. The war has taken more than 200,000 lives. Entire lives have been displaced. Civil war, violent death, cognitive routine is formalized. AMLO is likely based on this threat to premise of receiving death likely to weaken the drug cartels beheading the organizations to try to turn up to produce even more violence. This narrative of a more coherent strategy are not very promising. There are little room for renewed violence will continue despite Mexico will bleed profusely. The status quo to yield is catastrophic scenario. The Mexican state is unable to exercise monopoly on the first criminal organization. May take the example as they can operate between community threatening everyday life for most citizens. Mexico instability causes a pandemic and terrorism. Jones Roy in 17. Political instability hurts the entire region, disrupting trade, reducing human capital and accumulation. Empirical results despite strong terrorism, weapons, refugee flows affect other countries. Mexico case the destabilization of the entire instability in the U.S. is struggling. Mexico will be less capable of managing pollution and disease outbreak will weaken Mexico, but any Everest opposed Mexico's deteriorate to the falling out state of doing so. Scholars and policymakers be environment for terrorism, terrorist infiltration, cartels triggers U.S. Iran war. Chain in 19. The massacre of Americans in Mexico border serves a reminder that the Mexican drug war cartels pose the greatest national security challenge to the United States. But also Americans in the front line has sounded the alarm now. They'll have no choice but to do so. Later drug cartels will be responsible for most devastating terrorist attack in the U.S. soil. They have sparked a war with Iran and assassinated against Saudi ambassador. They have been flow throughout and informant strategies and furnace civilians such as highly unsettling the cartels likely enacted around security failed and trusting Mexico cartels to Iran security work. The act of war would have been changed history accurate. It could be probably disastrous not to retaliate. Mattis argues that Obama should have drummed up military action. We can no longer ignore Mexican, just so Mexican drug cartels will slow the division of Mexico, no longer to be ignored. The Mexican drug cartels and nearly carried out the worst terrorist attack in America since 9/11 and triggered a war with Iran alone and formed a diversity features of U.S. around war caused 15 Yellow and 20. Escalation of U.S. around relations, conflict, World War III, potential for global conflicts, coupled with additional claim by Iran is attention with Saudi Arabia and Israel. It is alignment with China and Russia to the U.S. and the invasion of Iran would not mean the conflicts killed in potential failure of locally stable in the region. Next pandemic causes exchange at the same way since 20 the world be experienced after even more severe coronavirus, neighboring sick mouths with long human sick part of viruses carbon dioxide can do incredible damage to the world of nature, particularly vulnerable if they are blooming faster with a outbreak present opportunity. You get focused where versus clearly threat that we can do things to deal with it. I stand open for cross-ex.
Okay, not quite yet. Sorry, Marge. Hang out there for a second.
I do not stand open for cross-ex.
I want everyone to be thinking about after the 1AC is what are some things that were super strategic about what this 1AC included, and think about it in relation to what the best arguments are on the topic right now. So some of the things that I thought about with this AF is, can this AF beat the core negative positions that are set out on this topic? So things that are huge on this topic right now, state's counterplan and the elections just had. And I want you to think about, like, what does this AF do to have an angle against both of those things? I can kind of see where the angle is coming from and what they might pivot to do in order to be able to beat both of these things. But that's something you definitely want to be thinking about when putting together an AF. And as a judge, it's something that you want to be noticing whenever you are listening to a 1AC happen. The other thing with the guided questions, you might want to be writing down best connections in the 1AC. Those connections could be things like, here's their angle against states, here's their angle against elections, and areas that you could see some improvement, maybe some internal link questions, some things that you're like, wow, that sounds sort of weird, evidence that you might want to read to try to understand some internal link questions, and then maybe just kind of any other comments that you might have for the 1AC. So without there being any questions in the chat related to the 1AC, let's move on to cross-ex. So continue, Marge.
Okay, you're good. All right, so the first question I had was on the Federalism Advantage. The Schechtman evidence talks about how it solves for state experimentation. What does that experimentation look like, or what new types of expertise do the states have that affects other areas?
So our Schechtman evidence describes the process of state legalization in the face of the federal ban on marijuana in the CSA. And it says that the way that states try to experiment with regulatory patterns for legalization, such as what rates to legalize it, how to interact with banks, how to interact with different businesses, and other regulations that I don't even know, they struggle to work around the federal ban on the CSA, and so it makes it so that their regulations are largely uniform across state operations. So by removing the CSA prohibition on marijuana, states are able to sort of play around more with regulations. Well, not play around because it's a serious issue, but they are able to act as laboratories of democracy.
Okay, so I was wondering how that related to the SERIC evidence that starts the democracy scenario. The evidence seems to talk about regulatory sovereignty. I'm just wondering, like, is there federal intrusion on democratic consolidation now? I don't know if I don't see, or is that the Tubbs evidence?
The SERIC evidence, the Tubbs 17 card. Describes that democracy is on the brink at the moment, but that an empowered state that uses the proper tools of federalism at their fingertips, is able to check the Trump.
Yeah, what would they do? It just says they need to be laboratories of democracy, but what actions would they take to send a signal abroad or something like that?
Oh, so our SERIC evidence gets better into the solvency of that, and it describes that states are able to cater policies around that the federal government makes around to more what they want. So when the federal government implements a plan, they largely don't have the funds to do that themselves. So when states are able to change the roles of that, or when states are able to set up the rules and the systems themselves, such as when the federal government isn't involved under a decentralized system that the plan creates, then the states act as the regulatory sovereigns, and public, more voices are able to be able to heard because there are more people, less people per government. Sorry, I'm having a hard time phrasing that, but you know what I mean.
I got
There's
what you're saying.
smaller government systems, so more people's voices can be heard.
Okay, the last question I had was on the industry advantage. The Crane evidence talks about New Deal projects that would come from increased revenue. Does the AF solve the economy via like new projects and stimulus, or what is the internal link to solving the economy?
Our argument is that full state legalization without the federal government hindering it enables businesses to sort of boom. And when the states have legalized it, they're also able to tax that revenue. And so the states get a ton of revenue for them to do New Deal projects.
Okay, great. So before we head into the into the 1NC, let's talk a little bit about that cross-X. The cross-X was pretty narrow, in my opinion, in terms of the two sort of small areas that it asked questions on. And it really focused in on some of the state, how does the states, like the states, individual states, solve certain things. The smart part about that to me was it kind of previewed what the like solvency deficits to the counterplan might be in terms of, you know, Marge's answers, or I guess Eva's answers in the 2AC for the state's counterplan. And it also kind of previewed what the negative strategy might be as it comes to attacking some of the internal link questions. I also thought that it would be smart to ask these kind of questions because the negative can kind of pivot in order to change what their counterplan does. So they might be able to solve some of the solvency deficits that the 1A exposed. But I kind of think that we were seeing here, what is the negative attempting to set up? Even though it was a pretty narrow cross-X, I do think we are seeing a little bit of the negative strategy. And I do think that they thought about those questions in advance. I think that, you know, Nate allowed Marge to talk a little bit too long, in my opinion. I might have asked a few more questions, but I like that we are being polite and we're letting Marge speak as long as she would like. Hopefully we're going to see now that some of these questions in attacks on internal links and solvency questions work their way into the 1NC. So looking forward into the 1NC, we're going to need to look at if the 1NC was too thin, if it covered pretty well in terms of both advantages, and, you know, how you would maybe try to allocate your 2AC if you were going to give a 2AC to this 1NC. So be thinking about those things as we get underway for the 1NC.
Okay, I've saved it on Dropbox. Let me know when everyone is good. Or, that's a silly question.
Just assume
right.
We're all good.
Abby has given me the thumbs up, and Abby is the only one that matters. So we will go. Is everyone good? First off is elections. Biden will win without Trump changing his base first strategy. Too soon arguments ignore the whole base only. Puts Trump in layer in 6-8. If the election were held tomorrow, Biden would win. He's leading by double digits in battleground states. He's up. Of course, so much has changed in 3 months. We know Americans feel unsettled. We don't know how they will feel in November, but it's not just the numbers in Biden's favor. Trump's political strategy is confused. His team are struggling to settle on a re-election message. Amid protests over police, Trump shows no sign of tampering his base first strategy. Trump has never connected voters beyond his coalition. The problem is that it doesn't leave the president any room to grow. He is losing ground. The combination of trends leads him in a difficult position. If he wants to expand his support, Trump must slip backers. To do that, he must do something extraordinary. Reach out to the other side. Marijuana legalization swings the election for Trump. It's an issue that will make voters change their minds. Kessler in 20. Marijuana has become a winning political issue. The remarkable rise of public support, the political benefits to the extent beyond that. Legalization is popular in swing states and swing voters. It's an especially potent campaign issue. Marijuana legalization is also popular in the battleground states that determine who wins. Independent and undecided voters support legalization by 2-to-1 margin. It's one thing to say that voters support, it's quite another to say they would actually vote based on this policy. Nevertheless, a few issues arise so much passion that candidates' decisions matter. Marijuana legalization appears to be one of these gut level issues. Political science research found Americans held stronger views than just about any other public policy. Legalization matter in a close 2020 election. A big political opportunity to run on legalization. Marijuana is a winning campaign issue. Trump election causes global retrenchment. Multiple scenarios for nuclear war. Right in 20. Trump is struggling to convert his worldview into policy, but if Trump wins that, could change. He would feel more empowered. Trump could cover global retrenchment. This would destabilize regional security orders. Retrenching is a false promise holding back would invite regional security cooperation, regional conflicts end up drawing the U.S. back in and resulting in a much more dangerous venture. U.S. pullback is likely to embolden regional powers. Russia would test with great zone warfare. If the United States pulled back, allies would acquire nuclear weapons. Good reasons to worry nuclear terrorist accidents, shorter response time conflicts spiraling into escalations. Retrenchment would heighten nationalism, would damage U.S. economic interests. Most likely, China and Russia dominate their neighbors. Such an order is inherently unstable. Would plunge cross-strait relations into chaos. Next off, topicality. Police reform must target illegal police activity. Bailey 95. Police reform action taken to change police behavior considered unlawful. This includes abuse of brutality, deadly force, searches without warrants or illegal detention. Modification include changes in the department's structure. Voting issue for limits and ground, including illegal police action, explodes the research burden, allows any change to police conduct. Next off, the counterplan. The 50 United States state governments and relevant United States territories should legalize marijuana. State legalization alone solves, allows use, creates norms, and sends a signal. Anti-commandeering clause means no preemption. Mikos in 12, state laws foster federally prescribed behavior or block sanctions. Fed does not have the resources to enforce bans, and its ability to marshal behavioral influences is limited by legalizing states to remove more significant barriers, including personal, moral, and social disapproval. State laws constitute de facto law. These have not and cannot be preempted. Given anti-commandeering, state legalization has fostered social attitudes, uses stride in the shadow with the Fed. It is the states that have emerged are the victors in this struggle. Next off, the critique: reforming the prison industrial complex via marijuana legalization is a pedagogical failure to engage in a politics of abolition, which causes genocide and imperialist war. Rodriguez in 2010. There can be no liberatory teaching that does not attempt to become abolition. Transformation of oppressive relations of genocidal conquest, settler colonialism, racial slavery / capitalism, compulsory heteropatriarchies, and white supremacy. Abolition has strategically prioritized the prison for catalyzing broader social transformations. Prisons are genocidal mobilizations of the racist state. Abolitionist position is challenging to the stubborn default of reformism, resistance derived from deep epistemological and cultural disciplining of the political imagination that makes liberationist dreams unspeakable. Abolitionist practice is pedagogical. Short-term survival of those immediately vulnerable to the system, and the long-term survival of the planet is dependent on pedagogical audacity. The alternative is an abolitionist praxis of creative destruction that refuses existing systems of oppression and actively imagines radical new forms of collective power. Rodriguez 19. Abolition is fundamentally a creative. Moments of successful abolitionist struggles produce human historical outcomes, yet it is imperative to theorize such moments as revelations of radical possibility that obliterate the cultural permanency of existing systems. And eliminating prisons is well but one aspect of a broader remaking of power that asserts a liberated autonomy from relations of dominance. Now, the case: Federalism Advantage. No spillover. They don't have a piece of evidence that says experimentation will affect democracy, immigration, or warming, or that it would cause any policy change as a result. Reject evidence only connected by the word federalism in random parts of the card. It's also resilient. Rodriguez in 14. The value of the system is the framework it creates for ongoing negotiation of disagreements large and small. Federalism constitutes a framework for national integration. It creates a multiplicity of institutions with lawmaking power. The negotiations required by federalism over drug policy debates like out in discretionary spaces of federalism, overlapping political communities. The system creates are neither locked in zero-sum competition nor bound by fixed rules of engagement. No internal links to democracy. The 1AC talks about democratic participation. There's no evidence that says it solves backsliding abroad. And if they win, legalization is inevitable. It solves the scenario. It only says experimentation is uniquely key. And democracy doesn't cause peace. Statistical models are spurious and don't assume economic growth. Masu in 12. All prior reports of democracies that force for peace are spurious. This result is fully accounted for by economic norms. Models show no evidence of causation from democracy to peace, nor is it likely that the causal arrow is reversed while democracy being the cause of the economy and peace. No such direct effect exists. The coefficient is zero. Even very high levels of democracy do not cause peace once consideration is given to the economy. The democratic peace is spurious, with economy being the more likely explanation for democracy and the democratic peace. And their 1AC Gherkin evidence on warming says state climate policy is coming now. That should solve it. Efforts now are effective. That's Rosen 19. And tribal government have signed declarations. So 2,200 businesses and universities together, these account for 60% of the economy. How much can they do in the absence of federal leadership? Quite a lot. It is really significant. Achieve 2/3 emissions reductions could bring that number close to 90%. The country is halfway there. States have been transformational and no impact to warming. Hart and 15. IPCC are wildly alarmist. Each scenario is based on linear projections. That in reference to tech or adaptation, all scenarios assume only negative impacts, ignore adaptation, and attribute any bad to warming. There is no basis for whether threats are malnutrition. Malaria is unrelated. Species laws has little foundation in experience. Even if correct, its impact would be slow, providing scope for adaptation. Modelers had wildly improbable scenarios. Warming is one of but many threats to biodiversity. Claims are high. 95% of the species have been lost. Losses slowing, reaching its lowest level in 500 years. Claims that warming threatens extinction rest on speculation rather than evidence. Species have proven resilient, having survived past cycles that involve much greater warming than likely in coming centuries. The industry advantage. The cannabis industry is thriving now. 1, revenue and sales increases under COVID. Simmons in 20. Cannabis dispensaries are skyrocketing. The average store has increased revenue by 52%. Annual revenues have seen sales leap. We remain open for business as an essential service. We are not in need. 2nd, banking access is rising. Smith in 19. Cannabis industry experiences 62% year jump in banking. The number actively serving the marijuana industry totaled 715. The data reflects a healthy increase. Now, the economy scenario. Socializing the economy during recessions. Checks the decline. El Arian in 20. The impressively strong jobs report may be a function of a notably relatively resilient U.S. economy. The impact of policy measures such as the PPP and data issues, the dominating narrative in the marketplace remains that risk assets will gain from either a strong or weak economy, because central banks will have no choice but to provide additional exceptional support in the event of a disappointment with that prices have continued to move higher after the jobs report. No impact. Economic decline doesn't cause war. Clarion 15 data from 109 died, 67 of which terminated, such as rivalries terminate during downturns, controlling for all the main explanations. This questions a diversionary war. Crises lead to austerity, which cut defense expenditures. Crises encourage straight inflation, where rivals downplay a rival. Crises increase the benefit from international cooperation. Leaders seek aid and investment abroad. Marijuana is not key to cartels. Longmire 18. Decriminalizing marijuana at the federal level has been proposed as a solution to cartels. Marijuana, not their moneymaker. Profits from marijuana are plunging dramatically. They're making up for that loss by pushing harder drugs. Marijuana season followed by half. However, methamphetamine smuggling steadily declined. No Mexico collapse spillover. Williams and Felt have Brown in 12 data. Drug trafficking organizations in Mexico do not seek to target the U.S. homeland or intend to conduct terrorism against the U.S., nor do they have the capacity or desire to overthrow the Mexican government. Mexico is not a failing state. Spillover could threaten certain U.S. localities, murder rates, kidnapping, and violent crime. No U.S.-Iran escalation. Horowitz and Saunders 20. Could the U.S. and Iran stumble into war? Escalation is rare. Powder kegs rarely explode. Iran's action is likely to be highly considered. War with Iran is unpopular in the United States and is unlikely to help Trump. Trump has long said that he doesn't want a Mideast war. Similarly, Iran's leaders want to stay in power. War would be costly. Trump has backed away from tough stances, may seek an off-ramp. Even if Iran strikes, it is likely to try to avoid escalating. Neither his calculation nor domestic politics are likely drivers of escalation. Escalation seems unlikely. Blowback may be coming short of an all-out war. No disease extinction. Dervis and Strauss in 20. Demand for greater co-op is the significant political trend that could emerge. There is a need for global circuit breakers that can isolate systemic risks and prevent risks early on and prevent them from spreading. Major crises open the political space for radical reforms precisely at a time when rules multilateral is in retreat. COVID will encourage efforts to bring about a better model.
All right, before we move on to the cross-ex, let's talk a little bit about what happened in the 1NC. The first thing I wanted to check on was, Ezra, did you give an order?
I realized that on the second.
That's good too. Okay, from here on out, everyone tried to give an order, but I think it also helped that we had access to the docs, so I think everyone was pretty much good. The second thing I really liked about this 1NC was that there's a diversity of options. So I can imagine that there might be a 2NC on the critique or one that includes the critique and topicality. I can also imagine there being a block that is the counterplan and the disad. So there are a lot of options that the 1NC gave themselves, just kind of depending on how the 2AC answers it. One of the questions that I had you all look at was, how is the split, meaning the coverage of off-case and on-case positions? And I think this is something specifically I want to speak to, because a lot of students tend to want to overload the off-case positions and totally leave the on-case positions way too thin. So there's been this big push to read like 8, 9, 10 off-case positions, when I don't think that that is necessarily where you want to be. So I think that Ezra's 1NC really gave a good split between some different off-case positions that can make a bunch of different strategies, and a lot of good on-case positions that really kind of covered all of his bases on this and will help set up a good 2NC. So think about that when you are putting together a 1NC, so you're not just off-case, top-heavy. The one thing to be thinking about during this cross-ex and kind of moving into the 2AC prep time is, what should the 2AC be prioritizing? What should the 2AC make sure that they spend more time on? Or what should the 2AC be deprioritizing? What's going to be the most important thing for them to be able to answer here? And kind of how can we predict where the block is going to go? So going into the cross-ex, I want you to think about, is this cross-ex really broad or narrow? Does it highlight what the 2NC is going to go for here? Did the 1A's indites work themselves into the 2AC? And who is really in control of this cross-ex? So let's have that cross-ex now.
Hey, Ezra.
Hi, Marge.
Okay, I'm going to start now. Your MECOS evidence on the state's counterplan is from 2012. Earlier this year, the courts ruled that RICO suits can be applied to marijuana businesses regardless of state legality. Attorney Jeff Sessions has also said that he intends to enforce prohibition as strongly as possible. How does the counterplan change these things?
Even if there was a court ruling on these questions, I disagree that that court ruling will be able to be broadly pushed in the court system. The DOJ simply does not have the resources to sue every single marijuana business.
Okay. On the elections DA, who is voting for Trump now that will change their vote after the plan?
Probably a lot of young voters. And also there are questions related to turnout. For example, there are people who perhaps it isn't that they will necessarily vote for Biden.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
There's also people who they care a lot about marijuana as an issue because it's related to, issues like criminal justice that they care about specifically. But if marijuana wasn't a campaign issue for either candidate, which it isn't in the status quo, then they'll probably just stay home altogether.
Interesting. Okay. Why hasn't Trump retrenched yet, but he would in the second term?
2 reasons. One, he has not tried to in the first term because he feels constrained both materially by his advisors and checks in the intergovernmental system, and also perceptually by the public and by the idea that he needs to maintain a broader swath of the GOP than just his narrow-minded, retrenchment-oriented base. So he also has to and wants to carry the Republican establishment. And second of all, these things take a little bit of time. There's bureaucratic processes we have to go through, and some of the things haven't been able to be gotten done yet.
I want to speak to his intentions. You said he wants to maintain establishment GOP. We're talking about the same person who said that he could shoot someone in Times Square and still win the election, right?
Yeah, we are, but that doesn't mean
that's fine. I'm ready to move on.
Material.
So Trump claims credit for every political action that has ever happened. And in the beginning of his election, he said that he has espoused the need for states to take action on marijuana. Why wouldn't he claim credit for the counterplan as his idea?
Well, first of all, he said that the states should take action. If the states take action without his lead, then he's probably going to backlash to it because we've seen that whenever people don't follow Trump's careful template that he has in his mind, he inherently backlashes. Second, even if he attempts to take credit, it's a question of successfully taking credit. Only the plan makes him successfully take credit.
And your argument is that the voters who are willing to swing their vote because they're marijuana-only voters know the difference between state and federal policies in terms of credit and blame?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, now that Eva's going to take some time for prep, let's talk a little bit about this cross-ex. Generally, Margaret is an excellent cross-exer. I mean, Ezra is too, but Margaret traditionally is really good at kind of controlling the conversation and making sure things go the way she wants them to. And in this cross-ex, I thought she was pretty effective at doing that. One thing I will say is that typically demo debates are really scripted. And so it's kind of hard to know whether or not things are intended or, stuff comes out a little bit scripted. And you won't find that in your debates. So the topic specifically I want to talk about here is broad versus narrow cross-exes. This cross-ex was pretty narrow, in my opinion. Marge really focused in on the state's counterplan and how the states is able to link to the elections disad, even kind of previewing maybe some of the 2AC answers on the permutation and the link story towards the end of this cross-ex. And I think that's because Marge's spidey senses were tingling that the debate is going to be about states and elections. In reality, I would probably, if I was the 1A, try to diversify or broaden my cross-exes a little bit, not necessarily knowing what is going to happen in the block. I might want to answer and ask questions about the link to the critique, the impact and alternative to the critique, and some questions on topicality. But for the purposes of the demo debate where, she kind of knows where things are going, it allows her to have a very narrow, pointed cross-ex to kind of give her focus on what exactly she thinks is going to happen in the block. Now, at this point, we don't know what's going to happen in the block, but based on this line of questioning, we can kind of see where things are going. So like I said, in real life, you might want to have a little bit of a broader cross-ex in the cross-ex of the 1NC, unless you know for sure where this is, about to go there. So looking forward to the 2AC, let's look at some things. Time allocation is really important, especially based on the cross-ex. If we think that the negative is really going to focus their debate on the state's counterplan and on the elections disad, how was Eva's time allocation? What is the strategy that the AF is going to employ on each sheet of paper? We saw some of this kind of already explained or exposed a little bit with the cross-sects of the 1AC, but what is kind of happening with each sheet of paper, and then can you follow the 2AC on case? One of the hardest things for 2ACs to do is debate the case in an efficient way. And so we're really going to be kind of focusing in on how is Eva's coverage on the case? Can you understand what's happening there? And is she being effective in shutting down the negative attack? So Eva, if you're ready, you can start the 2AC, but if not, we can also give you a little bit more prep if you need it.
Okay, yeah, I'm good. So the order will be the industry advantage, the federalism advantage, T, the K, the counter plan, and then the dissent. I'm gonna assume everyone's good.
Actually, Eva, can you give it one more time, the order one more time?
Yeah, industry advantage, federalism advantage, T, the K, the counter plan, and the dissent. Okay. Industry advantage revenue sales aren't increasing. Their evidence only speaks to a rise in individual users who use dispensaries, which is not an actual increase in people. There is not enough banking access now. Mohawk evidence is that the IRS is already burnt out from storing cash deposits from different companies now. Only the plan results in socializing doesn't check decline. The government will not do a thing to save the economy, especially Trump. His COVID response proves and legalization is the controlling internal link. Yes, impact. The man evidence is a collapse cause extinction because economic uncertainty controls how we respond to global security threats. It'll cause weak allied confidence and embolden rival state support for marijuana is key to cartels. So Jones evidence says that marijuana consists of 30% of cartel revenue, which is enough to cut into cartel operations. Yes, spillover political instability will disrupt the entire region, which will inevitably increase instability within the U.S. Both countries are interconnected through trade. That's Jones. Yes, escalation to chain. Yes, says cartels are directly responsible for terror attacks in the U.S., which leads to perhaps a violent sparks of war between the U.S. and Iran. Yes, extinction from disease, genetic emergence creates a feedback effect among a multitude of stressors that make it a mathematical inevitability that mutations will spread. The federalism advantage, yes, spill over. The Sarah evidence is that regulatory experimentation is necessary in democratic consolidation because it can help tailor effective political schemes to different challenges, which is enough to check Trump. Federalism is not resilient. The Shetman evidence is federal enforcement hinders state-based frameworks and prevents spillover into other areas. Yes, internal link. We saw backsliding. Sarah says that experimentation is enough to challenge things broadly. That was above. The CSA blocks effective experimentation. Now legalization is not inevitable, only the act solves it. Yes, democracy causes peace because farm evidence says that it's the only thing that is a proven remedy for every crisis. Otherwise, the litany of scenarios risk extinction. Climate policy isn't effective now. Their evidence is aspirational. State empowerment is key. Our evidence is that there is low level action now, but it's not enough to solve their impact. Yes, impact will pass the tipping point. Unchecked warming reaches high temperatures and cause extinction. T, we need the plan specific criminal justice reform in the area of sentencing and policing. Legalization, SDI policing is a breakthrough reform that deprives police of their primary policing tool. Walk in 20 cannabis legalization, teacher law enforcement to self-control. Cannabis is the college enemy. Must have the removing primary weapon or question by legalizing cannabis. Expunction is within inherited through breakthrough in CGR. The AMCRUNT outweighs the topic lacks room for development, expanding the limits of what areas of CGR we allowed to keep the app innovative. Better education, the war drugs central to the CGR debate, excluding debates for debates that don't accurately reflect the topic. Reasonability, we are good enough and core part of the topic. Competing with information cause a race to the bottom justifies only our app is topical. The K, framework, roll the ballots, to guide ability of implementation must ensure case modeling versus predictability is key to check infinite regress. It's a voter but turns the not exclusive. Second is rejoinder demands casual relevance and is the only commensable means to determine a winner. Permutation, do the app and engage in the abolitionist practice of creative destruction. Marijuana criminalization has a uniquely debilitating effect of introducing people of color into the cycle of recidivism. Targeting it for reform doesn't trade off. That's a dissent to the out. There's no link. The app does not perpetuate the war on drugs. It's a step in the right direction and solves link. Burns 14, when marijuana leads to the war on drugs. It's really marijuana is just one aspect. When during federal policy, when it legalized that, well, frame momentum to change federal policy and hurting other songs. I don't see an unintended consequence. The war on drugs would become more and more entrenched. The old fails versus reimagining the prison system sustains the federal ban on marijuana and doesn't spill up to real material change. Two is that case is a dissent. First is the industry advantage was an implicit critique of how neoliberal world industries have shifted policy to favor incarceration and violence. The plan is a case study to better understand contextual connections between legalization and incarceration and to test particular actions to mitigate that violence, which doesn't preclude supporting radical movements. The two is that the federalism advantage also critique challenges to governance in the form of states' rights and advocates for decentralization of power. The app solves their impact. It dismantles systems of of oppression. The counterclaim firm do both. It shields the link to the dissent conditionalities. A voter creates time and strategy to use not reciprocal undermines argumentative responsibility. Dispose all states fiat. A voter contrived no lectures in uniformity, not reciprocal and illogical because no single decision maker could choose. Doesn't solve versus the industry advantage. States can't generate certainty on their own, only removing federal prohibitions and signal that runs economic collapse. That's claim. 2 is it doesn't solve decentralization. Possible federal enforcement hinders innovation of regulatory structures and co-ops state authority. Only CSA removal. That's checkmate. 3 is there's no federal follow-on. Adams. 14 national legalization remain elusive within 10 years. Medical. Most experts just the timeline is longer when it comes to marijuana across the board. And hybrids in Congress make it very difficult for legalization in the near term. I can't imagine any time soon a couple more generations where Congress legalizes recreational. The counterpoint links to net benefit legalization will flip the election and cause political spillovers. The plan spills over to immigration decentralization, quick and haste. 13. Coal attempts to put many concerns rest situation involving the federal legitimacy. Consider wider conflicts held the United States to determine cannabis policy results in other states demanding further impacts other aspects such as immigration. Unchecked Trump immigration agenda collapses science supremacy in 17. Trump's orders damage collaboration science and tech around the world. The more prosperous world, the more stable innovation science trying to the ban entire confusion more researchers around the world. Trump's immigration science either romantic to international science so homosexual building make the world less safe. Science supremacy stops extinction federal aid stability around the globe required concerted efforts to adjust to factors that cause these to fail. The world faces complex countries, marches, health emergencies, environmental degradation, poverty, food insecurity, and extremism. These can become global threats. Addressing this, let's use scientific cooperation among our allies. We may use recognition of goodwill science and generate such to achieve diplomatic goals in the global effort to biological and nuclear security. That is Trump will win economic rebound. Lisa and Levin 20 permanent professor over me to claim that we are going to see the best economic data in the history of the country. It's my biggest story. Obama individuals with the level of concern. He said, hi, the bounce back could be very fast. We'll see Trump could be poised to benefit from dramatic numbers and his many Democrats face. Every today Trump gets high marks. This the challenge for Biden. They should all be going home. October will get GDP growth. It could be a double-digit best ever. There's no link. First is that GOP votes approve legalization. Too many constituents changes, guarantees, Dems get credit, and electoral wins in the midterms. Roman 14 Republicans oppose marijuana as a big cultural watch issue in elections. Democrats would apply a blow to Republicans to include in purple states. The Republican Party is institutionally opposed to any effort because the party must serve for master's private abuse corporation, the Christian right, MIC political activity as laws. So the Republican and GOP will continue to lose electoral races. 2 is that the link threshold is tiny. Legalization would swing election. It's not a key issue outweighed by other voting blocks. 11, 14 legalization never polls as a high priority issue for voters. It's always on the list. Popular jobs in the healthcare voting, demanding a civic actual center voting, but they're low propensity voters trying to quite hard to turn out. Other voting votes will be easier to avoid. That could start their numerous other issues and matter a lot more. There's no internal link. Marijuana legalization will cause Trump to destabilize the entire world and turn plan alienates Trump's base. ABC June 10th. The growing voice of Republican believe Kushner is alienating the base because he's too moderate. Carlson is taking him to task the force support of Republican is not appraised by House sources. Echo Senator Kushner assumes our base is going to go along, accuse him of driving the president in the wrong direction. Only a risk of a turnout waste. Swing voters are real and turnout waste. Freelander 20. Everything you can get about policies around their only swing voters no center. The Activist 2020. Forgo Biden professor of environmental South Democrats are years of lack. They're curious and American altruists are really shaped by voters changing their minds. The shift to that. The classic view is that the winners are right. They change the voters. The idea that there's the informed engaged population watching these events. It's just not true. Clinton running the entire campaign for some should be up. Republicans and these voters talk with GOP. It doesn't matter. Who's running matters to voting anymore. Many GDP voters have any particular goals. The elections are won by turnout rather than switching sides. There's no Trump credit. First, his image is baked in. Two-thirds, just 80% believe Trump is the race most significant credit. It takes on criminals from Trump to use to apologize to Spur Central Park Road, along with the calling for jailing of demonstrators better to get a criminal. Trump is having to put them control narrative. B is that Trump won't take credit. Diamond 27 side believe Trump would hear from black communities. Trump has since his long order police better don't think police incidents. There's no retrenchment. McDonald Pier 19. Trump has already promised to extract the U.S. from commitments, but Trump is armed establishment gets from sure that the president has an altered footprint or has shifted allies to country. He's loaded greater military responsibilities every time he announced his drug free. He reversed himself. Trump increased presence. He stumbled into new military commitments from vacillations, uptake cosmetic redeployments, and not a full reduction. American allies resist Trump's abuseful burden, sharing that Trump administration has put the bill. No end in sight. Trump has been quick to blame those setbacks to the deep state. The president's committed to retrenchment, but advice for locking him. Get the president's removal, forcing it with legions of advisors. Trump appears to get what he wants. That was almost high school, right?
Good job, girl. All right, so let's talk about the 2AC a little bit before we do this cross-ex. A lot of things I super loved about this, and some things I want to point out to you all. The first question we asked was about just like time allocation, and I thought our time allocation was good. I think that she identified that probably the things that were the most threatening to her like the state's counterplan and election is where she spent a good chunk of her time. I'm going to talk about those sheets of paper more in depth, but we also sort of need to look at the strategy on all of those pages. The next thing I want to talk about is just debating on the case. Eva is doing something here known as embedded clash, where she's not necessarily highlighting what the other team said before she's answering it in like a traditional line by line way. And sometimes that makes it a little bit harder to be able to follow. So if you aren't someone who is super skilled, like I thought Eva was very skilled at this component, you might want to kind of shy away from embedded clash. So one of the questions we asked was it difficult to understand and flow? And for some people, it might be. Most of the time when she's answering arguments, she is just kind of saying the opposite of what the other team said. So for instance, she answered federalism is resilient by saying not resilient, and then kind of making her argument or reading evidence where she needed to. So that was kind of the first thing to notice about the case is embedded clash. I, again, caution anybody who wants to do embedded clash that you need to be sort of extremely skilled in order for this to go super well, or else your judge is going to kind of be lost where you are. And just make sure that you're super organized when you do it. The other thing I wanted to talk about is just some strategy on each page, specifically the counterplan. So I thought that if the negative does go for the counterplan, a good chunk of what the affirmative is going to have to do here is hammer hard on the solvency deficits. And in my opinion, I kind of thought that the solvency deficits to the counterplan were a little bit lacking. But one thing that the AF did that kind of made up for it was that they read an add-on. And so traditionally, you might just read some solvency deficits, permutations, some no solvency arguments, some theory and move on. But I think Eva did something really smart in this, is that she read an add-on or something else that the counterplan maybe cannot solve, so that they can kind of hang their hat on. So even if she didn't have a super strong solvency deficit, she did have an add-on that the negative is going to have to answer and figure out how the counterplan solves it. So that's a pretty good moment on the counterplan. In addition, I also thought that the argument that Eva made preempting federal follow-on was also really good. Typically, the negative is going to make this as their main trick to the counterplan in the block. And I thought Eva did a good job of heading that off at the pass and just kind of was like, you know, we're going to start this debate now, and I'm going to be ahead of you before you even make it. So I thought the 2AC overall was really good, but I want you to be thinking about those questions, time allocation, strategy, and maybe what you might have done differently. So aspect of the 2AC, I want you to think about what the best connection is and what is the 1NR going to be. Is this going to be a setup for the 1NR? Because typically when the 1N tends to cross-sex the 2A here, it's all about what they are going to take in the block. So we can kind of make our predictions here. So it's up to you all. Take it away.
Okay. Let's start by talking about the election CA. Your GOP won't support legalization evidence is from 2014, before Trump was a politically relevant actor. It cites people like Romney and Chris Christie, who Trump has pushed to the margins of the party. What evidence do you have that Trump won't support legalization?
Okay, well, the diamond, I'm going to refer you to the diamond piece of evidence, which answers your question. It's not about legalization, but it proves that regardless of whether or not he actually does decide to legalize, his image is already baked in, and nobody will believe that he's actually behind this, so it doesn't flip the election.
Both Diamond and the Scott card are about policing and criminal justice and racism. How does this relate to marijuana and young voters?
Yeah, because the plan is seen as criminal justice reform. Obviously we'll read more evidence in the 1AR, but all the evidence that you will read in the block is going to be about low propensity groups of people who won't swing the election. So I'm going to go ahead and
that is a spicy take about cards we have not read yet. The state's counterplan. Let's talk about the immigration add-on. The counterplan, by allowing states to pursue their own marijuana policy, meets the stipulation in the CRIC internal link card about states needing to do their own marijuana things. So why does the counterplan not solve it?
Yeah, it's the same argument as the federalism solvency deficit. The counterplan prevents spillover, right? Because it doesn't repeal the CSA, hence it prevents spillover into other areas such as immigration.
Where does the CRIC card talk about the CSA?
What did you say?
Where does the CRIC card talk about the CSA?
Well, it's not explicitly there, but it's, yeah, it's the same deficit as the federalism deficit.
Okay,
And
how
going
do
to
the
the- Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
how do the states check Trump's powers on workers' visas for scientists, which is what your internal link to broader science diplomacy is about?
Yeah, our argument is that decentralized immigration standards are a result of spillover from the plan. We resolve that.
Okay. Trump has actively denied science related to the current pandemic, social distancing, mask wearing, and continual COVID spread. How can the US express scientific leadership in a way that would solve international conflict?
Yeah, our argument is that we can express scientific leadership by having scientists who express scientific ingenuity come together and cooperate. And then they would share evidence, and that our evidence argues that that would resolve international conflicts.
Okay, the federalism advantage. If the states are creating their own climate policy now, why is the plan key to the effectiveness of that climate policy?
Yeah, so this was in the 2AC. Our argument is that nothing's happening at the moment, or climate policy isn't effective now. State empowerment is what resolves that.
All right, sorry, y'all, I threw up a poll right in the middle of your cross-ex.
Okay.
Hopefully everyone saw the poll and was able to take advantage of it. And we've got some overwhelming suspicions that the 1NR might be taking the elections dissad. I guess we'll see here. But based on the questions that Ezra was asking, especially towards the beginning, that seemed to be right. You know, what he was focusing in on was really all about the elections dissad. So I think everybody's spidey senses were triggered on that. The other question we asked was sort of about what is the best connection. And I don't think that there was anything that sort of stood out to me as like, this is the most important. But I think the questions Ezra was asking are really going to set up what he ends up going for in his 1NR if it ends up being the elections dissad. So let's focus on the block here. The way that we're going to do the block is I'm going to kind of let the block happen in its entirety and then come back and talk after the block is over. So we'll do the 2NC, we'll do a cross-X, we'll do the 1NR, and then we'll speak about the whole block in its entirety. So for the 2NC, I want you to be thinking about if you agree with the neg block's decision. Would you have picked something differently? Would you maybe have divided your time a little bit differently? Did they pick things effectively? Do you think it was the right choice? And then second, what's the best connection made by the negative at this stage of the debate based on their cross-exes, their speeches? What's the best thing that you as the judge is seeing based on those connections? And in the cross-ex, I want you to look at if this cross-ex is broad or deep. And was it effective at identifying the major negative arguments and exposing the major flaws in that argument by the affirmative? Okay, and we'll talk again after the block is over. So unless we need a little bit more prep time, negative, you all want to speak up here?
I put the 2NC in.
Great, looks like we are all set and ready to go. So you guys can download that. Nate, make sure you give us an order. And then we can get started.
Okay, so assuming that everyone's been able to open up the doc, I'll give an order and I'll give it twice. It is the K, the state's counterplan, the industry advantage, and then the federalism advantage. I'm going to repeat it. The K, the counterplan, the industry advantage, and then the federalism advantage. I'm going to assume that all lights are green. Alrighty. The K, concede the permutation. It's just a test of competition. We're not going for it. The state's counterplan. The counterplan mandates state legalization that draws down penalties to marijuana markets now. The rollout of the counterplan sends a massive signal legally and economically that CSA is done for. That solves both advantages. First, it solves for the federalism advantage by fiating states impose their will and experiment, causing the same spillover effects that the AF claims. Second, it solves for the industry advantage by normalizing the marijuana market and moving the biggest hurdles to industry success. line by line, they say perm. The perm links to the net benefit. Trump would get credit for the plan as head of state and GOP leader, especially considering discussions of it at Democratic debates. It would immediately become a presidential election issue if the USFG took action. Now, theory, conditionality, it's good. Counterinterpretation is we get one counterplan and 1K. First, neg flex, necessary to balance against unpredictable 2AC skew, which is key to fairness. Second, ideological flex, forces the AF to defend advocacy from the left and right, which is the most real world education. Third, air neg, they pick the AF, speak first and last, and the topic ground is already skewed AF massively. Fourth, at worst, stick us with the counterplan. Theory should never be a reason to reject the team. The state's theory, states counterplans are good. Offense, one, necessary for neg ground to counterbalance against tons of unpredictable AFs. Cross-apply AF bias from conditionality. Second, it's core topic education to debate states versus federal. It's a core issue of CJR. Now, defense, solvency advocates check abuse, and you should reject the argument, not the team, just like condo. The solvency deficits. First is the industry deficit. State legalization certainly solves. The 2AC was light on this. One, chilling effect. States normalize the market, encouraging players to take risks despite federal punishment because federal drug enforcement is stretched too thin. The prohibition era proves that they'll try it. Second, investment. 1NC Migos evidence says removing state barriers quickly jumpstarts the industry and provides the revenue that can save many growing players from bankruptcy. State legalization compels investment. Local laws are a bigger driver of market behavior. That's Migos and 12. State laws give the most current and relevant information and more likely to shape choices than federal laws about norms. States employ majoritarian lawmaking that make updating laws easier because federal laws are so resistant to signal fades quickly. CSA illustrates the point society's views have changed, that the ban is out of sync. State laws have all been more recently supported by large majorities. There are so social sanctioned because state law also convey more accurate information about local norms important because norms are held by local, exert more influence even if they cannot shield from federal law. States make people feel more secure by signaling the public approval. States wield powerful influence not subject to congressional preemption. Signaling approval, states may even hamstring Congress's already limited ability. Given federal limited enforcement and comparatively weak influence, citizens are not dissuaded by the federal ban. Exemptions have become a de facto law. Now, the federalism deficit, the counterplan solves better. One is time frame. The act doesn't see out states experiment after the plan. The counterplan gets the ball rolling immediately. Second, no federal preemption. That was earlier. The counterplan is protected by anti-commandeering law. That's 1NC Migos. Third, no resources to preempt. Even if they wanted to block state autonomy, federal agents would be massively overstretched trying to block solvency. That's 1NC Migos as well. Fourth, precedent. The counterplan solves federalism, but the act doesn't. Only the counterplan as a first mover can demonstrate that states can act first in other areas. The plan sets the precedent that states can only act after federal decisions are made. That's Rouch 13. Can and should states act independently? Colorado and Washington affect federal-state relations for years. They asked whether the Fed should let Colorado and Washington implement favored state leadership. Clash is the latest in state-federal confrontation. Law by itself cannot decide how to proceed. There is no avoiding political choice whether to determine how the Fed and states will cooperate. The same-sex marriage state-led approach has been successful for reasons applied to marijuana, and letting states lead is worth doing. Now, the follow-on argument, the Adams evidence actually goes neg. We don't need to read more evidence here. The counterplan will convince the federal government to follow on. I'll reread 2AC Adams in 14 here. Federal legalization is inevitable. There's a lot of money in it, so once they start seeing the money, Washington will say, we want a cut of that action. Experts all agree it's more than likely that marijuana will eventually be legal. The links to the net benefit argument is not true. The counterplan doesn't give votes to Trump. States would get credit in the role of the counterplan, not the federal government. The add-on, one, it's based on federalism, which doesn't spill over. That's going to be on the case. Second, the card is about the travel ban. Inevitably, the signal would have already been sent. That's from years ago. Now go to the industry advantage. The economy scenario, no evidence proves that we'll hit a recession that we can't recover from. COVID has caused a dip now, but socializing large parts of the economy solved. That's the Alerian evidence, proven in 2008 and the bailout this year. The Fed can just move some decimals around and create liquidity for struggling industries. And even if a recession happens, no war from decline. Extend the Clary evidence. Large data sets of over 109 dyads confirms that leaders downplay threats in a recession to save face. It leads to military cuts and foreign aid requests, not bombs and boots on the ground. Now, the cartel scenario, no internal link to it. That's the Longmire evidence extended here. They're long on their way to harder drugs like opiates and meth, which is where they get their funding from, proven by dramatic declines in marijuana seizures over recent years, less than half the amount. And the internal link is not reverse causal. The internal link is not reverse causal. All 1AC narco-terrorism evidence says cartels are winning because of power and failed government strategy. No evidence that reducing some of the funding can kill them. And the Iran impact is speculative, opinionated, and nearly baseless. There is no evidence that Iran is trying to infiltrate Mexican cartels or that those cartels would accept that. The Williams 12 evidence is better and proves that they would rather focus on domestic issues and financing to keep control. They're not politically motivated in the same way. And the only type of infiltration that would happen would lead to an increase in things like murder rates, which is the more obvious answer. And no escalation from Iran conflict. That's Horowitz and Saunders. Leaders are rational and understand the massive losses will destroy their popularity in countries. They'll be rational in times of miscalc, proven by the tanker attacks from recently. And no disease scenario. What disease breaks out in Mexico? How does it go global? Why won't it happen now? They can't answer these questions. Their evidence simply entertains a hypothetical that does not build a projected scenario. And no disease impact. That's the Dervis evidence. They'll burn out or vary to become less lethal and can be quarantined when spiraling out of control. This is demonstrated by COVID, which proves no extinction risks and that very transmissible diseases have lower lethality rates. Now go to the Federalism Advantage. There's no spillover. No 1AC card says how we get from weed to warming and so on. This advantage is a myth after the STEM cards, nor does it say that states will become involved more intensely in other sectors of law. Only marijuana regulation. At best, spillover is limited to issues that marijuana can be an example for. Foreign models of democracy and climate change are completely unrelated. There isn't spillover. Issues within federalism are different. That's Rodriguez and 14. Negotiation and the positionalist perspective work against totalizing theories about how to allocate power. Many different federalisms exist. If we even identify a stronger proper conception of federalism, that conception will depend on the regulatory domain. Immigration federalism looks different from economic federalism, and they're in a double bind. Either they win spillover and the Trump thumpers cause the impact to all of the advantages, or they demonstrate resiliency. I'll extend the thumpers here. Federalism is incoherent now. Trump is taking leadership on minor domestic issues, but ignoring foreign policy. The burdens of state and federal levels are completely mixed, which is the Harkness evidence. But those thumpers demonstrate what Rodriguez 14 from the 1NC argues, that federalism is built on negotiation. Therefore, the CSA cannot meaningfully deter states from trying things in other areas just within the regulatory domain of marijuana. The plan can't be key to other issues. Now, on the democracy scenario, there's no correlation with democracy and war. That's the Mossow evidence. All data supporting the DPT can be connected to economic prosperity as well. They can't reconcile good economic conditions spur democracy and not the other way around. It's just bad statistics. And there's other confounding variables too. Culture, military priorities, etc. Tanner and O2, democratic peace theory underemphasizes and neglects other domestic factors such as political culture, socioeconomic and military considerations, strategic culture, among others. Sweeping generalizations may leave details in decision-making unaccounted for. In the warming scenario, status quo solves climate change or nothing does. That's the Rosen evidence. States are taking the lead now in effectively reducing emissions. Either the federal government will block them on climate, which the plan can't stop, or the states can solve up to 90% of emissions reductions without federal help. The 2AC answered in Crossix that this was just not true, but their evidence already got the ball rolling. They said that they need to protect federalism, but they read cards that already demonstrate that federalism in the warming domain is fine now. And I'll extend the impact defense. The hard evidence is really good. Climate change is slow and humans can adapt. As a resilient species, IPCC models are irrelevant because they're based on hyperbolic projections. It also says within the card that if London were to make projections based on the way the IPCC does it, they would have projected that the entire city would have been in manure during the Renaissance periods and that they could never survive as a city, but they adapted. That demonstrates that tech can catch up with capacity concerns. Here's newer and better evidence on the question. CAS 18, bad economics creates absurd estimates to ignore human capacity for adaptation. A small set of studies demonstrates this research. They reach their imposing figures by refusing to consider how society will adapt. Technological advancement will make a city more resilient to heat. A study has positioned the United States to be well adapted. Can you imagine a society? If you imagine a society that is static and incapable of innovation, the prospect of climate change must be terrifying. Doomsday predictions failed because an assumption was mistaken. Society is constantly adapting. If a projection of climate change costs ignore adaptation, ignore it. That'll do it.
All right, we're gonna roll right into Cross-X and then move into the 1NR, and we'll talk again after the 1NR is done.
All right, good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does the counterplan abolish the CSA?
In terms of federal follow-on, yes, but it's not a fiated mandate of the counterplan.
Okay, so how does the counterplan solve for the internal link of experimentation if it's still in place, kind of?
Well, so the CSA will exist, but it'll basically be a paper tiger. It's not capable. Federal authorities are stretched too thin. I believe it was the card before Crane or the Crane evidence that says that they really only can afford to prosecute one or two of the biggest players in the industry, which means as long as they stay spread out, federal government will be, looking for a needle in a haystack.
Okay, so let's talk about follow-on then. How does follow-on function? Because when I read the Adams evidence, it makes a clear time frame distinction to me. At some point, marijuana will be legalized, but the AF's impacts happen before then. Right?
Yeah, so to me, the AF impacts don't have like a clear enough time frame, and I do think that the Adams card says most experts think like right now that follow on won't happen. But like it also says that a top expert agreed if they got to see the economic benefits in action, they could be more convinced. Right now, they can only see small examples that they can write off, like Colorado, Washington, etc. But we're arguing that if the state's counterpoint happened, the massive demonstration of the economic revenues that would happen would compel policymakers to follow on.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Different line of questioning. The add-on is not about the travel ban, but is about immigration writ large, and says that state independence in the area of immigration spills over to other areas. Why does Rodriguez answer this?
I think your card about spilling over into immigration is about federalism, but I don't think that the card that gets it to science diplomacy is about anything other than the travel ban. It says like Trump denying visas like creates a chilling effect on scientific exchanges. So I think it's about getting to the science diplomacy impact, not whether you get to immigration. And I would also follow up with saying the Rodriguez stuff we read on case would answer the internal link.
Okay, so the Rodriguez stuff on case to answer the internal link says that immigration federalism could look different from economic federalism, i.e. like federalism can look different in different areas. Why does that prevent spillover?
Yeah, we're saying that if they're different regulatory domains, then the expertise doesn't really do much. Like the expertise they gain under marijuana regulation and what they know to do with how to regulate weed is at best like a criminal justice issue. I don't think it would affect the way that they manage like immigration policies.
Okay.
Webinar, you all set?
Webinar is set and saved to the Dropbox. I'll give everyone a moment to pull it up. This time, my speech has an order. It will be the elections DA with an overview. I will give everyone about 30 seconds, and then we will give the speech. Okay, I'm going to assume that everyone is ready. Okay. U.S. retrenchment outweighs and turns case. Probability of escalation. Drawdown leads to multiple regional powers filling the vacuum. Russia and China would invade neighbor states. Allies would prolife without security guarantees, which causes miscalc. It's as big. Multiple nuclear powers get involved, and tit-for-tat escalation causes extinction. It turns economy and pandemic response. Trump-led response fails pandemic response and prevents long-term effective economic recovery after COVID, and Biden wins solves all their federalism arguments. All uniqueness is about states being necessary to check Trump. If there's no Trump, then there's no one to check, which includes the add-on on the counterplan. Biden also does the plan for taking 10 in 20. Biden can change his position. It's at the point where he has to be legalized. Biden said cannabis plan would decriminalize, like expunge records and create opportunity for research. Biden wins now. Biden has a clear advantage in swing states, and Trump won't campaign outside of his base. That's Larry, and Biden winning now, including in the Electoral College, but it can flip Skelly in 6-12. Biden has a clearly state level service to get Biden edge. That's how the outcome will be decided. The state level polls will be Biden holds the lead. Michigan and Wisconsin, Biden is comfortable. Arizona, Georgia, and Texas all seem to align with the national polls. Florida, tilted to Biden. However, all of these battleground states are more Republican leaning. That speaks to Trump's advantage. Should Biden continue to hold a size will lead, the chances of Electoral College popular vote split will be low. But if the polls your odds will increase. If Trump carries every state that's more Republican leaning, he would win. And lead overcomes possible polling error. Peters in 618. There are other warning signs for Trump. He's on the defensive in must-win states. Safe states look competitive. It's still 4 months. Things are better for Biden than they ever were for Clinton. The polls could be off, and Biden would still win. Whether that's the case by November is another question. We'll explicitly concede their argument in that evidence that a strong economy helps Trump win, and the 1AC argument that economic decline is coming without the app. This is a new link argument. The plan saves the economy before 2020 elections, and those high numbers are able to keep Trump in office. The link debate. Trump will take credit. Fiat necessitates it. The most likely way the plan will happen is Trump signs their appeal, not that he opposes it, and there's an unprecedented veto override. Prefer normal means over a politically contrived abnormal means. Their evidence from 2014, before Trump was even relevant. It's about the GOP establishment who doesn't have any power. That was Crossix. He takes the political opportunity to claim credit, and it swings the election. Crane 19. Trump has every reason to champion legalization. Will improve the chances of re-election. Trump support bill that exempt legal cannabis, or the CSA embrace of legalization would be spurred by political motives. There is no political downside. He could realize very real political gain. 64% support legalizing. Trump would need new issues that can earn him votes. Millennial voters, while they lean progressive, don't have a strong loyalty. The most important swing votes all have legalization. Zeal votes. voters Trump could be credited. Now, marijuana reform flips the election, particularly in salient battleground states. That's Tesla. There is a ballot initiatives link. State ballot initiatives are a tool to drive Dem turnout with a plan takes them away. That's Wassinger. In 19, marijuana could determine a re-election. Pro-pot ballot initiatives in every swing state will tip the balance in favor of the Dems, but the president will hold out the rug from under this and turn the issue to the disadvantage of his Democratic opponents by redirecting resources for the CSA away from marijuana. Trump would take the wind out of the sails to press Dem turnout. Trump would commit to federal marijuana reform, make opponents look ineffective. Now, they say that there's no internal link. This quip isn't actually an argument. We have a scenario, which is that legalization allows Trump re-election, which causes global retrenchment. They say the base turn argument, base support is already locked in, non-base voters outweigh. Engine 6-7, Trump base is not abandoning. He's had that as support. Trump's winning 95% of the Republicans. It's going to be difficult to get beyond that. He doesn't need to change. That's a mistake. Trump is a week outside of the base, lower than any Republican. If Trump doesn't switch things up, he may find the other side's base is larger. Now, the GOP supports legalization. Their evidence is about policing, which is completely non-applicable. Aiken, in 18, a majority of Republicans express support for legalization. Support is higher among Trump voters in swing states. It's Sarkisian in 19. A poll shows significant backing for legalization from supporters of Trump. Trump voters could set a record for support for recreational use. Poll found 67% of Florida voters likely support legalizing. The swing voters argument, state ballot initiatives link argument. Affects voter turnout, which is what their evidence says is key. It's created by outreach. Swing voters are dominant in battleground states, and specifically the youth vote will flip to Trump. As Mohanty in 20. Marijuana is gaining a lot of attention. The sudden outbreak of COVID. Biden is the only one who opposes legalization. Youth political activists want to convince Biden to support legalization to attract young voters. Trump could attract young voters by supporting legalization, and young voters are key to the election. Kapoor in 20. Voters under 30 make up 19% of the electorate. Clinton's margin was 5 points lower. The numbers were devastating in swing states. Biden needs to take this very seriously. It's a very real possible problem for him. Now, they say that it's all baked in. They're baked in evidence. It's about a different link story about being perceived as racist, which isn't our argument. You should refer our specific link evidence about marijuana instead of their link evidence about another app. And won't take credit was answered above, and this card still is not about pot. They say that there will be retrenchment. Advisors can't track Trump in his second term. It's different. That's Fitch in 20. Trump seeks dramatic changes in his second term. Trump interpret re-election as a vindication. Trump has a clear penchant for risk-taking and could appoint new officials who are tuned to his thinking, less resistance to changes, and it causes extinction. Fisher in 20. Trump winning poses an existential threat to the West, end of the liberal order, departing from global leadership. Trump favors narrow nationalism. Should Trump win, he will have a mandate to recapitulate. It makes a difference whether Trump is in for 8 years rather than just 4. It would be wrong to expect nearly 4 years of the same. If Trump is re-elected, he will behave even more radically without retreat. Who would be left to stop him?
All right. I'm sending out a poll right now. It's a good one. Did the negative make the right choice in the black? This is not necessarily a question as to whether or not they're going to win or lose. This is just a question as of, at this point, was this the right decision? We've got a pretty good split. All right, while you're filling out the poll, let's talk about the block as a whole. I think we kind of called this spot on, that it looked like they were going to go for elections and the counter plan. I think we were right here. And I think that the 2NC did a really good job of identifying the AF's major flaw in the counter plan, which was the solvency deficit issue. And I'm sure they were able to capitalize on that and kind of make use of that in the 2NC. I thought Nate in particular had really great line-by-line skills, where he really was able to organize and compartmentalize things, which made it easy to flow. You can kind of see the differences in the way that people do their line by line. And I thought Nate in particular was excellent at making it easy for us to flow. The one thing I thought about the 2NC was that a lot of the case ended up being a little bit of bluster without substance for me, especially on the industry advantage. I don't know how you all felt about that, kind of making sweeping claims about internal links without having much evidence or many warrants that kind of go along with that. But you can kind of decide how you feel about that, or whether or not it's even going to matter in the 2NR. The 1NR I thought had the best set of connections. I think Ezra did a really good job of stopping, slowing down, and kind of really emphasizing certain places where the affirmative might have made a mistake, or that the negative was going to capitalize on something that the affirmative said. So specifically, The no link argument about the economy I thought was really smart and good. And these arguments are smart and good, but they're just so much better when Ezra stops, slows down, makes eye contact, and actually makes those connections with the judge. So kudos to Ezra on that one. I think that a lot of his speech put the act into some tough spots, lots of good moments where he made slow key connections with the judge and audience, and overall a really great solid block. I also thought the cross-ex was super good. I think Eva has a really commanding presence in cross-ex where she asks a question and sort of gives the audience a little bit of side eye, like, well, what does this mean? And I think it's effective. It's a different type of connection than Ezra was doing, but it definitely was a connection nonetheless, where she sort of asks a question and waits for an answer with a little bit of, well, what are you going to say to that? And I think that is just as effective as what Ezra was doing. So good connections on Eva's side for the cross-ex. And I really think the cross-ex was really focused in on what the main arguments are going to be on the counterplan. So the add-on questions, whether or not the negative evidence applied to it, whether or not the negative was too flippant in their answers to the add-on, and kind of doing a little bit more to explain the solvency deficit. So excellent all around. If anyone has any questions, this would be a good time for that. I want to check in on the 1AR. 1AR, how are you faring coming along? Are you ready, or do you need some more prep time?
I am good to go.
Okay, so if anyone has any questions, I'll kind of wait for a second while Marge gets set up here. You can definitely post them in the chat for us to talk about. Other than that, we'll let Marge get started. Margaret, what's your order?
The order is the industry advantage, the federalism advantage, the state's counterplan, and then the disadvantage. I'm going to repeat that order one more time just to make sure everyone has it. It's the industry advantage, the federalism advantage, the state's counterplan, and then the elections DA. All right, starting. Industry extend 1AC cream criminalization block states from garnering revenue that state can save their economy. It's on the brink now because of COVID. There's no socialization defense. Trump won't do it. And the 1NR explicitly conceded this advantage. Yes, war. Clarity doesn't assume loose nukes, terror, and proliferation from decline causes extinction. Also, their democracy defense says that the thing that solves war aside from democracy is the economy. That's their Miso evidence. To it, the rest of the flow. I'm not going for this advantage. You can concede the impact defense. Federalism. Yes, spillover. Marijuana is a landmark issue that shapes overall balance of power. The 2NC cannot grapple with the specificity of our regulatory expertise internally. They say spillover is limited to areas where marijuana can be an example. Our Schirmer evidence provides marijuana gives states that regulatory expertise. It's not about the literal regulations of marijuana. It's about the political learning you do from crafting regulations in general. Marijuana is the test case that spills over to broader state authority. Mikos and 9. This article provides one of the most important federalism disputes in a generation. This is part of relevance to understanding of federalism resistant federal authority. Marijuana insights could be applied across a wide range of issues. The outcome on issues may hinge on Congress's ability to laws and Congress's power vis-a-vis the states. The double bind, it doesn't exist. The regulatory internal link avoids it. The status quo may have an imbalance of power, but the plan solves it by building expertise among the states. Their thumpers are uniqueness for us. The plan successfully creates a decentralized model of federalism. That is 1AC Schirmer evidence. Democracy solves existential threats. North Korea, Middle East, Russia, poverty and terrorism make escalation and extinction inevitable. That is the 1AC Kasparov evidence. Democracy is a conflict filter, consolidation, caps, escalation. Albright in 17. Democracy are the most promising path to peace and security in a turbulent world. Norms of security of a liberal democracy lead to better security over time and across multiple dimensions. Empirical evidence accumulated with expertise affirms the observation democracy not go to war against one and other less likely to respond to internal learns conflicts because they true rule of law and intermediate changes is most vulnerable. Weak capacity, legitimacy, breakdown of the social contract. This must be to repaired institutionalized inclusive politics critical to peace. It also solves their impact to Trump retrenchment because democracy fills in. Democracy warming, I'll concede there's no impact to it. The counterplan. Extend the permit shields the link. It shifts credit between the states to the federal government, which minimizes the link, or the counterplan links to net benefit because it triggers their ballot initiatives link, and Trump will still claim credit because he claims credit for everything. The industry solvency deficit. Counterplan can't solve it. Banking is key and state law doesn't change it. Only the plan solves startup cash. America businesses are 10% the size of Canadian ones, proves our internal link. That's the 1AC evidence. I forget the author. The federalism solvency deficit. The CSA caps the ability for states to experiment with federal regulatory structures for legalization. State level legalization may be an affront to federal authority, but it can never diminish it. That is the 1AC Sheckman evidence. The CSA invalidates state action, creates a chilling effect, and can't spill over to other issues. That's the 2AC Shansky evidence. There's no time frame differential. Experimentation is about the process of legalization. What regulatory structure gets set up is determined before legalization. Fiating uniform state action is not state experimentation. Yes, the federal government can intervene. Their MECOS evidence is 11 years old and doesn't assume Sessions controlling the DOJ and RICO suits trash states' ability to legalize, which is what their evidence says is the protection from suits. That's a 1AC Adler evidence. It doesn't matter if the government doesn't preempt state law, states fear it, so they avoid legalization. Their first mover argument doesn't assume the past decade of state legalization or Trump's election. State first mover doesn't solve decentralized federalism. Schirmer in 17. An increasing number of states have legalized or decriminalized marijuana. However, marijuana remains a controlled substance. Tester strongly opposes legalization of marijuana. Therefore, the prospect of greater federal repercussions. Prosecutions contrary to what many believe marijuana laws continue to be enforced. The inconsistency of marijuana laws because the federal government of many states raises serious and unprecedented federalism issues. Follow on. No, it won't happen. The Adams evidence says at some point the tides will turn, but that is at least a decade away. That was cross-ex. The F impacts happened in the interim. The add-on was basically dropped. We have a specific evidence that marijuana spills over to immigration decentralization, where it says the federal government should explicitly allow states to take the role, is where it says that, even though 2AC cross-ex was a little shaky on that. Our Gherkin evidence says that states are able to moderate Trump. Our Maxman evidence provides a brink. The scientific diplomacy impact was conceded. Extinctions creates linkages that prevent nuclear disaster. Trump means it could happen at any time, so it outweighs their impacts on time frame and solves the impact of Trump retrenchment. Fedorov says warming, water, pandemics, environment, and food insecurity are all existential threats that the F solves. It outweighs on magnitude. Try or die. They have zero impact. Defense and the counterplan doesn't solve. The dissat. First, impacty. Trump won't retrench. Impact send McDonald to retrench. He hasn't done it in the past 4 years. Neg says re-election means no checks, but there's never been checks. It's more likely bark and not bite. No retrenchment. Fitch in 20. We should see a distinct possibility of retrench for policy being on the status quo. In the second term, Trump may lose interest in bringing about changes. Discussion could set in. Trump could face a greater bureaucratic opposition. Trump would remain critical of U.S. commitments, country refrain from disrupting alliances. NATO, Japan could make it a consistent adjustment. Toby needs criticism will fade under Trump's successor. Now the overview. No turns case. They have zero uniqueness evidence and a smaller internal link to the F impacts. It doesn't turn the economy. State budgets is our internal link, not Trump. Biden won't solve federalism. Trump is already damaged democracy to the point where things can't just go back to normal on their own. Congressional gridlock means that states are key to solve immigration. Biden won't do the affirmative. Their evidence about federal decriminalization, which still leaves marijuana on the CSA. Biden's ineffective on foreign policy. They don't solve their impacts or ours. Power in 20. Biden would be mistaken for Biden passion or Russian policy, but some little evidence the world will remain worried down by the standoff. I see no sense for their good ideas listed by Biden. Biden needs to beg your changes, and he has articulated before. Many can respect the U.S. again before in peaceful uniqueness. Trump will win now. Extend Liz. Economic rebound appears to be massive. For our evidence, there's just a snapshot of polls. Are just predictive. It's from top economists. Even Trump will win electoral advantage based on a relentless wave of offense versus Biden. ET June 19th. The last 7 days has been worse than Trump at his tenure. However, the week and long time it produced. He had been here before 4 years ago. Polls predictors claim, however, the electoral college where Trump scored for addresses voter consider Trump presidential campaign is deeply resources confined to campaign, or he has his base battleground state Trump to be expect to hard win against Biden. There is no link. Marijuana is not key. Extend the Levine evidence. Marijuana is far too down on voters' concerns to shape the election. Marijuana only voters don't exist because stoners don't vote. Issues like the economy, COVID, and abortion matter way more. Trump won't get credit for the plan. Group it. Voters think he's racist. That's baked in. The plan has zero effect. That's Scott evidence. Double bind. Either the link is thumped or small reforms don't overcome Trump cheats. ABC June 10th. The White House is providing announcement of many proposal devices. Concede the new proposals are overshadowed by controversial state and states in the wing are dictated by the 20 trees impact of what our goals for days and what is set out to be. Second, even if Trump does get credit or he can maintain it, he'll do something racist. It's who he is. Parker and 20. African Americans voter consider Trump to be racist, not to be driven by German exchange, conduct, pandering particularly to devils and stereotypes. American Americans beneficiaries. Trump reported medical freedom to Russian law under Chesky. He earned that made around give Russia a medal. He was a slap in the face. All right.
Good job, girl. Okay, so let's talk about this while the 2NR is getting ready for their last speech. What did we think of Marge's roadmap? What did we think about where she read evidence in the 1AR, and how was her coverage? So if you've got thoughts on that, you can throw them in the chat. I would not have given a different roadmap. I sort of think that she dealt with the case and did the things that she needed to do, including kicking an advantage. I also thought that her placement of evidence in the 1AR was really good. I thought after the block that they were behind on the link debate to the election stat and probably behind on the solvency question for the counter plan. We do have some comments coming in that she was super efficient. I really agree with that. And the one thing I really wanted to talk about here was Marge's ability to make good connections. I think she had a lot of phrases and good little kind of gotcha moments that she pointed out that she tends to do to make the AF kind of come back from what I thought was a really good block. So there were points when Margaret was like, you thought you got us on this, like, you know, economy advantage, but also this is why the economy advantage is able to solve both of your impact claims, or kind of making a claim on federalism that the impact of federalism is able to solve the retrenchment advantage. And I think that some of those connections kind of really brought the AF back into it. Other points where she made connections that I'm definitely going to remember as a judge, like stoners don't vote and Trump is a racist. Both the things that she said on the link debate in the 1AR that are things that kind of stick with me, that really feel like the tide of the 1AR kind of turned the debate back to being more even with what the negative was doing. We also have more comments that I agree with in the chat that the 1AR was slow enough that you could really understand what she was saying on each of the different positions, but she was extremely efficient in doing that without losing things like connections. So overall, I thought the 1AR was very good, very efficient. Keep your comments coming into the chat. Everyone can sort of read those. And let's get ready for the 2NR and the 2AR. So what we're going to look at here, sorry, is we're going to look at where are they winning and where are they losing. So what are they going to need to do to be able to win as the negative? And then what is the AF going to have to be able to go for to be able to beat the negative strategy here? Does the negative make the right choice in the 2NR? And does the AF kind of collapse down to just what they need to go for in order to win this? And then start looking to the post round here. So after the debate is over, if you are negative, you kind of want to write down what you think your speech would have been going into the 2NR. And if you're affirmative, what would you write down in those last 30 seconds as what you wanted to be kind of like your signature pieces of offense or defense going into the last speeches? So we'll hear the 2NR, the 2AR, and then we'll kind of gather our thoughts at the very end in order to get ready to vote. So Nate, are you ready? Okay.
Yep. Okay, so there's no doc this time, luckily. The order is going to be the elections disad, the state's counterplan, the industry advantage, and the federalism advantage. To repeat, the order is going to be the elections disad, the state's counterplan, the industry advantage, and the federalism advantage. All right. Retrenchment outweighs. U.S. security guarantees are the largest barrier to hotspot escalation. Trump flips that upon re-election. He'll be emboldened and wreck credibility of NATO, Middle East, and Southeast Asian alliances that let China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea challenge regional actors. Credible commitments are a filter for their democracy and econ impact, and a collapse of hedge makes their case scenarios inevitable. Their impact defense is that Trump will feel complete or get exhausted. That's laughable. He's a raging narcissist who will have no more elections to win. The Fitch and Fisher evidence both prove a second term is an existential threat, and checks are out the door. Biden does not have to strengthen hedge, as their defense says, just prevent alliance fallout. He's already signaled in that direction, and their evidence is about start in Ukraine, not about maintaining credible commitments. It turns also case impact or DA impact turns all their Trump warrants, turns their science diplomacy impact, because Biden election means that Trump can't wreck the credible science diplomacy signals. It also takes out most of the uniqueness for their federalism scenarios and significantly mitigates the risk of the case, which means the disad more likely turns it. The uniqueness debate. Biden will win now. Trump's tunnel vision for his base and Biden's massive poll lead proves he'll secure a victory. That's the Lehrer evidence, which answers the Siders because the base will never leave Trump. Their ET card is wrong and answered by one of our Skelly evidence, which assumes that electoral advantages and says that Biden will win through swing states in spite of those advantages. Their polling arguments go neg. That's the Peters evidence. It was true of Clinton, but Biden's lead is larger than that, and polling error cannot account for reasons why Trump might win. All of the uniqueness is relatively going neg, which is bolstered by a massive link, and that should frame the debate. We have two. First, yes, economy link. It was relatively dropped. I'll begin the link debate here. The 1AC said that the economy can't recover unless the plan happens. We conceded that they cause a quick V-shaped recovery that will happen and cause a Trump victory because he gets to take credit for it. That's 2AC Liza that even the 1AR tried to extend for us. And we also have a marijuana link. Legalization is popular and Trump takes credit for it. First, he'll take credit because his base supports legalization in swing states, which was the dropped 1NR Sirikisen evidence. Second, he'll use it as an opportunity to hit Biden from the left to steal young voters in swing states, which is the Mohatni evidence. Framing issue. They conceded that young voters in swing states can flip the election, which is Kapur and Freelander. This answers their evidence that stoners don't vote. Non-users still vote on the issue, especially young voters. They said other issues like COVID and the economy matter. We have an economy link that accesses both of those, especially since most of the stress around COVID is economy related. This supercharges the econ link we extended above. I'm not going for the ballot initiatives link. Our scenario is all about swing states. The credit argument. Yes, Trump credit. Our link story isn't about racism. The ABC and Parker evidence are good on tweets and statements, but not policy. Those voters are already set in, but those are suburban whites who think that Trump is unprofessional. Our link is about youth voters in swing states and people concerned about the economy, not the same voting bloc. Neither of their cards say it sticks to Trump because in terms of statements, he's political Teflon. Prefer Crane 19 speaks to his decision-making and is specific to legalization. It even says he'd specifically take credit in the context of the app in order to win swing progressives who care about legalization, which is a reason to air neg on evidence specificity. The counterplan. The counterplan solves the app. State legalization is the fastest way to revamp federalism and restore markets. If the counterplan solves sufficiently, then the risk of a disad should be a reason to vote neg. They conceded condo is good, so judge kick the counterplan if the status quo is a more logical option for you. The permutation, it can't shield. Credit spills up. There's no state actor that has the same platform and voice to change the narrative like Trump. He'll win every media battle. At worst, the plan splits credit, which means including the app still triggers the disad link. But the counterplan alone doesn't trigger the link because federal narrative is still firmly against legalization. Only the plan's signal gives Trump an avenue to support legalization and move on the side of the counterplan. The industry deficit, they are so far behind on it. The counterplan definitely solves this advantage. That's MECO. State law is more proximate to businesses, so they base their decisions on that. That was in the 2NC. Legalization jumpstarts a ton of investment and encourages banks to cooperate because there's no federal capacity to preempt the states. They've never answered that the Fed doesn't have the resources to make the chilling effect credible. And the federalism stuff, the counterplan does solve it. That's Rauch. CSA doesn't cap experimentation. It just threatens every actor in the market with lawsuits. They've conceded that there's no capacity to enforce those suits on everyone except one or two of the largest players in the industry. That was Crossex. The deficit isn't strong enough to prevent state autonomy. Rauch wins us the debate. States being antagonistic with the Fed, even if the Fed is successfully preempts them on marijuana, emboldens them to draw the line in other areas, means we access spillover and their deficits are even if their deficits are true generically, which answers Shansky and Chemerinsky. The Fed cannot intervene. The capacity argument was dropped. Sessions isn't the AG, it's Barr, and motive doesn't mean that Barr has the means, which was above. The add-on, we have two answers. One, it's about federalism, which means the counterplan accesses it with the work that I just did. Second, it's about the travel ban. Who cares? They can't reverse that perception. If anything, it just proves the DA turns case, which a Biden presidency would solve. And then go to the industry advantage. I'm only answering the econ impact, no impact. Clary's the best card in the round. First, conceded that we have the largest data set on the issue, 109 examples. Second, no answer to leader psychology. They can't advocate for military cuts. They'd advocate for military cuts and foreign aid instead of boots on the ground. Loose nukes and terrorism don't account for that. The federalism advantage. No spillover, 3 arguments. 1, the CSA doesn't prevent experimentation in other areas. The system's built on antagonism. That's 1 in C. Rodriguez. Political learning isn't empirically verified. Second, issues aren't all the same, which was established in Crossex. They don't have a card that says that other areas will be doomed even if the plan doesn't happen. It's i.e. it's not reverse causal. Third, their MECO's card from the 1 hour is wrong. It only says that it spills over to things like abortion and same-sex marriage, which doesn't link to their scenarios. The democracy stuff, they still are statistically wrong. Economic conditions, military priorities, and national culture over-determine government action, which is Mosu and Tanner. Hedge collapse would be a filter for that impact anyways, which demonstrates that the disad impact is the largest impact and the controlling one in the round. As long as we have a risk of that, they can't access a credible case scenario.
All right, Eva, are you all set or do you need some prep?
I'm good. Okay, the order, yeah. The order is the Federalism Advantage, then the Industry Advantage, then the Counterplan, then the disad. Is everyone good? Do I need to repeat it? No? Okay.
Federalism Advantage, 100% risk if case reduces the threshold of a solvency deficit. We need to win. Science diplomacy outweighs in terms of impacts the deficit. It creates linkages to solve existential risks among great powers and enables cooperative ventures to resolve every threat. Climate change, water shortages, public health emergencies, environmental degradation, etc. all make extinction imminent. Trump means that any of the scenarios listed above could escalate at any time, which makes their disset impacts inevitable. The spark for conflict is likely to come from a lack of a conflict dampener that promotes resilient relations. 2AC, federal evidence is that science cooperation allows us to achieve developmental goals that improve nuclear security, which means that only science diplomacy can serve as a check on Trump retrenchment. Counterplan doesn't solve the impact, it maintains the CSA, which runs spillover into other areas. This is not about the travel ban, but about overall immigration policy, and it does reverse perception. Correct evidence is that state independence spills over to further independence in other areas like immigration. We control their impact. Science diplomacy is the linkage that controls security. That was about. We did not concede warming is solved. Now Trump makes everything and taking time bomb in the status quo, which proves we control their impact. Yes, spillover. 3 arguments. First is that the CSA stops experimentation because it places legal burdens on states that prevents them from doing stuff. 2 is that they're wrong. We've read evidence that says independence encourages states to innovate in other areas. Their evidence is that federalism looks different in other areas. That's true, but it doesn't prove that state-based frameworks encourage growth. 3 is that Mikos is right. He says that marijuana is a test case that will spill over. Industry Advantage concede that econ impact. We're not going further. I'll answer the link on the disk. That counterplan doesn't solve federalism. It leaves in place the controlled substance act, which caps the ability for states to experiment with regulatory structures for legalization. 2 arguments. First is federal presence. It affects state policymaking. That's when you see Scheckman. A looming CSA hinders experimentation because it leaves in place extensive federal involvement and forces states to either venture off on their own and deny federal policy or maintain complicity with federal policies that leave them little to work with. 2 is competition and resources. Decentralization encourages industry competition. That's good because it encourages states to compete against one another to find the best solutions. The counterplan leaves in place federal oversight, which leads to inefficient regulations and state uniformity. The Roch and Mikos evidence is from years ago, and don't assume Sessions' enforcement of marijuana sanctions. RICO suits and DEA raids are still happening. It's a federalism crisis and eats marijuana and federalism. That's when you see Adler and Layer Cherminsky. The DISAT, the length threshold for this DISAT is tiny. Legalization will not swing the election. 2 arguments. 1 is that it's not a key issue. The 11 evidence says that legalization never pulls high priority issues, even for young voters. The litany of higher profile issues outweigh things like the economy, jobs, education, and healthcare. Make the neg read actual evidence that says that a stoner voting bloc exists and that this one group will swing the entire election. You should prefer our evidence because it analyzes key voting blocks and predicts that the people their evidence is talking about are all low propensity voters. 2 is that the GOP will not support legalization. The Whirlwind evidence is that Republicans have always opposed legalization because it goes against their core beliefs about drug policy, which proves that it won't change the election outcomes. 3 is that Trump won't get credit. A is that his image is already baked in because people believe he's racist. Things like advocating for the death penalty at the Central Park 5, jailing demonstrators, etc. proves that the plan will have 0 effect because people know he's not behind criminal justice reform. That's Scott. But B, even if he does get the credit, he'll do something racist because it's who he is. The plan will be seen as pandering or and eventually the link. That's Parker. Or C, small White House reforms can't overcome racist, incoherent tweets that overshadow any reform, which destroys any semblance of a link. That's one error ABC. And there's no impact. The 2AC McDonald's evidence says that he's continuously promised it, but nothing's ever materialized because he's all talk and no game. He has only increased troop levels rather than reduced them. Prefer evidence because it cites examples like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Syria. Second is that Congress will oppose him. They'll ensure that he refrains from disrupting alliances and prevents materialization because they're fed up and annoyed. That's Fitch. There's no econ link, even though this is new. Our 1AC evidence says states aren't legalizing until November, so the F doesn't boost the economy until after the election. They have no evidence in debate that says that states will legalize before November. It would have to get on the ballot or have legislation introduced to state congresses, and young voters care way more about racism than the economy. The Sarkison evidence says nothing. It's about crazies in Florida supporting legalization, but it's not enough to swing the entire election. And Mahoney evidence is speculative. It says that Trump could attract young voters, but we've read evidence that says that other issues outweigh. We did not concede that young voters in swing states flip the election, but rather read evidence that says the opposite. They're comport free. Lebanon evidence says that swing voters are persuaded by outrage, but Scott answers this and says that his image is already set in stone regardless of legalization. There's no Trump credit. Our evidence is in the context of criminal justice reform, which is what the plan plan would be perceived as. The Crane evidence might be good, but our evidence is predictive and says that regardless, voters will perceive Trump to be the same racist person he is. That was above. Their Fitch evidence is aspirational. It says that Trump might feel emboldened from getting reelected and that he could appoint new defense officials, but not that he will. Our impacts are not inevitable. Only science diplomacy can institute the necessary checks to check Trump because it ensures credible commitments to other countries. So like a little over high school time, but like.
All right. So now at the end of the debate, we got to answer some questions. Did both rebuttalists start in the place where they were winning the most offense? And did they make connections that on important substantive issues? So I think that yes, everyone pretty much started in the place that they knew they needed to win the debate. And I thought connections were a little bit lighter in the 2NR and the 2AR, though I do think there were some moments when both sides slowed down to make some big points about everything. So now that the debate is over, you have to make a decision and give us an RFD. You can do this on the Google form. I have attached ours to our lab's D2L, and the scholars is also on their D2L page. There's a link there for you to go click and vote. It asks you to write your name, to pick which side won the debate, and then to also write us an RFD. All of these things are required. We do not want you to submit a vote without giving a reason why you voted. And you should take some time to think about this. Voting is not due at a certain time. You can take time to think out what you want to say and why you thought a certain side won. Your RFD should be supported by referencing specific pieces of evidence. You should reference arguments that one side made, and then you should kind of support it with multiple reasons why something is true. So you shouldn't give us one-line RFDs. You should really sit there and think a little bit about why you decided the way that you did. You can review the evidence that is on the Dropbox. The evidence will still be there for you to go back and look at. So if you want to call some link cards that were read in the block, or if you want to call some of the cards that Marge read in the 1AR about the link, or maybe some impact defense cards that were read in the 2AC, you might want to go look at. So when you're done doing that, you can submit your RFD and make sure that you keep both your flows and your RFD so you can talk about them in lab. Does anyone else have anything they want to ask about? We'll also be able to take some questions during this time period as well. So you can put the questions in the chat if you want to ask some of the debaters some things. You can do that there.